everyone, and welcome to another session of the Oracle Apex Office Hours. My name is Shakib Rahman, and I'm an architect on the Oracle Apex team, and I'll be your host today for this session of the Apex Office Hours. So let's get started. This is part 3 of our 5-part series on the What's New in Apex 22.1 series. So we have an exciting session here today. We have some speakers from the Apex Dev team talking about the features that they've worked on. But before we get into any of that, I want to talk about some quick announcements and updates. Right? Can everyone hear me okay? I just want to make sure that my voice is coming through clearly.
Yeah, you sound great.
All right, thanks, Jason. So let's get into it. The last few office hours, the week before and last week, you can watch all the sessions again on replay. So you just go to apexoracle.com/office hours. You'll find all the links right there. The first session was really a summary of all the new features, all the marquee features. And then last week, specifically, we discussed, we kind of went into detail with a few things. We have some upcoming in-person conferences as well coming up very soon. So very soon, in fact, like next week, we'll have the Apex Connect conference in Germany. And this one will also have a number of members from the Apex development team there. So if you're there in the area, definitely stop by and say hi and meet the team. We'll also have a presence at Kscope. This is happening in June in Texas this year. And we'll have a set of people from the Apex development team there as well. So I encourage you to attend these conferences if you're close by or nearby. Later today, there's also another office hours session in Espanol happening 1 hour after this one ends. So it's going to start at 12 p.m. Eastern. And you can learn more about this by going to apex.oracle.com/go/Apex Espanol. This will be, again, on new features in this new release of Apex. So this is a 5-part series. We've already sort of covered the sneak preview, the approvals component, the data generator, the tokenized search and faceted search improvements. And today, we're going to be focused on all of the updated components and new features and new components in this release. So we'll talk about some updated components, including changes to the Markdown and rich text editor, the new order by page item feature, and REST-enabled SQL queries, and finally, how you can install your sample and starter applications within Apex in a much more streamlined fashion. Then there's 2 more sessions as well. Just note that next week, we'll be talking about the developer experience improvements, so changes in the application builder. And followed by that, we'll have a final session of our 5-part series on persistent authentication, PWA, and user experience enhancements. So the speakers for today, we've got Stefan Dobre, Carsten Zarsky, and Daniel Hochleitner. So I'll pass it on to Stefan first, and he's going to talk about the Markdown and rich text editor improvements in Apex 22.1. All right, take it away, Stefan.
Thanks, Shakib. So, as Shakib mentioned, let's quickly discuss what Apex 22.1 brings regarding to the rich text editor and rich text, be it Markdown or HTML in general. There are no huge features, just small and medium enhancements across the board. Let's start with the interactive grid rich text editor column type. So since Apex 20.2, I believe, since we've moved over to rich text to CK Editor 5, we've been able to edit rich text directly in the interactive grid. And we get this little pop-up, we make our change, we click away, and it gets saved. However, once you're done editing your content, the rich text aspect of it so far has gone away. In most cases, I suppose that's desirable because the interactive grid is a data grid, so you don't really have space for that much content. But in certain cases, you might wish to retain that rich text. And that's what we've done in Apex 22.1. If we go to the rich text editor column within our interactive grid, we now have a new attribute called display rich text. We can go ahead and enable that. And now our rich text is rich both in the edit mode and in this read-only mode. So depending on whether it's set to Markdown, you could achieve things like links and lists and block quotes. But if the rich text editor is set to HTML, then the sky is the limit. You can embed tables and images and videos and all kinds of things directly in the interactive grid. Next up, I wish to talk about the SQL Editor 5 upgrade that we've done. We went from version 27 to version 32 because this library is updated quite often. And we took this opportunity to rethink the way we expose this library. So the library that's behind our rich text editor, how it's exposed in the front end and how developers can hook into it to further customize it or build their own widgets and controls. So first and foremost, we are now exposing it on the front end under a different namespace. So until now, if you wanted to make any sorts of customizations, you had to go through the classic editor global object. We never documented it because we knew there would be a better one coming soon. And now it has. This new object is called CK Editor 5, and it very neatly shows us all of the plugins that we can use and configure. So now that we've restructured this build, we can finally answer the question of which plugins exactly are included in this build and which not, which wasn't as clear before. And to answer this question, this is the list of CK Editor 5 plugins that come bundled with Apex. Basically, we tried to include as much as we can. What we're not including are plugins that are marked as experimental by the CK Editor 5 team, such as HTML support and source editing. These two specifically could be used together to achieve functionality similar to CK Editor 4's edit source feature. We're not quite there yet, but as soon as these plugins become stable, we will integrate them in Apex as well. We're also not including any of the commercial plugins for obvious licensing reasons. And there's two other plugins that we're not including because they're quite new and not really production ready. But besides that, we really try to include as much as we can. As an example of the way you could leverage this new global object, say you ended up somehow on the CK Editor 5 documentation page and you found this restricted editing functionality where basically the user cannot type anything here, but only in the designated places, and you wish to have the same functionality in Apex. Because it's something so specific, we're not really looking to make it a declarative attribute, but if you are JavaScript savvy and you really need this functionality, it can be achieved. So if we scroll down a bit, we usually see some example code like this, but the gist of it is that it leverages the restricted editing mode plugin. Based on their examples, it probably comes from something like NPM, but in an Apex context, we don't have this. Well, now this restricted editing mode, which we can see that is included right here, is part of this global object. So the way I enabled it for this example is simply by going to the JavaScript initialization code bit of my item, referencing that plugin and pushing it onto the extra plugins array of our configuration. So while this wasn't exactly possible before, it is much simpler and possible now. Next up, we have the HTML embed feature. So let me quickly reset the page. By uptaking this new version of CK Editor, we can now also leverage newer plugins that have been introduced in the meantime. And one of these new plugins is called HTML Embed. Again, it's not quite the view and edit source mode that we're still waiting for, but it is something quite interesting. So once you set your rich text editor to toolbar full, you will have this new entry here at the very end called Insert HTML. But before I click it, let's go through this example. Say I'm editing some blog post or something, and I want some logo here, maybe the Oracle Apex logo or something. I would go to the Apex website and try to steal this one right here because it looks pretty good. But I see, okay, so it's not an image, it's some SVG looking thing. So obviously HTML. If I were to just copy this element and paste it in here, we wouldn't get very far, right? This is not what we were looking for. That's where the insert HTML toolbar item would come in. You click on it, we get this new block widget, and we can paste our raw HTML in here. Let's click apply changes or save changes, and you get a nice preview of what was just pasted. So that looks much better than what I had before. So that looks good to me. By default, once you're done applying your changes, we'll show a preview. But if you wish to always perhaps just show the raw HTML to see what's going on, you can configure that via the initialization JavaScript attribute. And here is the very same content, but the previews are disabled. So you can go ahead, keep editing your content, but this HTML snippet widget will just show the actual HTML. So that would be the new HTML embed functionality. And of course, you can have as many such widget instances in your content as you wish. Last but not least, some few enhancements around Markdown. So as you know, we can output Markdown as part of the interactive grid, interactive report, classic report, and in a bunch of places in Apex. We found that the styling of the rendered Markdown was not exactly consistent across the board. We've made it consistent in this release. And if you yourself have some Markdown that you wish to render somewhere outside of these components, and you wish to still keep the same styling, do wrap your content in a div with class is markdownified, and you will inherit the same styling for things like headings and block quotes and things like that. Lastly, we took a look at our Apex Markdown.to HTML PL SQL API, and we have adapted it to accept a CLOB as opposed to a varchar input based on popular demand. So I believe that's it for me. And back to you, Shakib.
So Stefan, I've got a question here for you in the chat. Can you say something about the security of this rich text editor, right? So what's safe to use? Like, how do I store this?
Mm-hmm.
Et cetera.
Sure, that's actually quite a big topic that we're in the process of writing a blog post on. But in short, the editor comes in two different modes, in HTML mode and in Markdown mode, right? We recommend that users go for the Markdown mode, which goes through a process of converting it to HTML, and we only really allow the elements that are safe to then be, my green screen is going crazy behind me, that are safe to render onto the page. So we do recommend that you simply go with the Markdown mode. If you go with HTML, you have to be careful, and where you end up outputting that content you are in charge of passing it through some sanitization API, some JavaScript library, perhaps like DOM Purify. That's why we recommend Markdown, which doesn't really allow arbitrary HTML. But if you need pure HTML, you have to take care of the sanitization part.
Got it. Great. And I have one more here. How can one know about the available options that can be used in that JavaScript initialization property?
Do you think specifically for this editor, or for this item, or in general?
Like for this item, like for the CK editor?
Well, there's the help text. So there are some examples there. And in this specific case, we have something called options.editor options. And under editor options, you can throw in anything that the CKEditor 5 API offers. So that's what that configuration would go in. So whatever is on in their docs goes under options.editor options.
Okay, cool. Thanks so much, Stefan. And before I pass it on to Carsten here next, I did want to share one more thing. There's one more conference that I forgot to mention earlier, and this is Apex World 2022 in Netherlands. So this is happening in Zeist, and this is from May 24th to May 25th. Sorry, that's a typo here. I should say May 25th. So another conference in Netherlands here. All right. So now I will pass it on to Carsten, and Carsten will talk about the order by page item enhancement, as well as enhancements to REST-enabled SQL. Right.
Thank you very much, Shakib. Let me share my screen. Come on. So there we are. I hope everybody can see my screen okay, and can hear my voice okay. Yeah, I would like to show you two new features now in Apex 22.1. And let's first start with the new, and the name is a bit tricky, order by item, which could be a bit misleading, but let me show you what this is about. And I think everybody will get it very nicely. So let me start with a plain page to first illustrate the motivation, right? Why did we do that? In. And we have a page here with a cards region, and you see I didn't do too much regarding the style and the layout. It's not crisp, right? And we can see a classic report. And the classic report, as you all know, has means for the end user. I'm the end user now to order by the columns. As the developer, I could turn ordering for specific columns off, but the end user has means to order that report as they want to. And the same is true for interactive report, interactive grid. For those, sorting is even more powerful, as you can have multiple columns and so on. However, when we look at the cards regions again, well, there is nothing, right? So the developer, of course, can determine ordering, but the end user, well, they can do nothing. And that's exactly what the new feature, the order by item, is about. So let me have a look into Page Designer, and here are my two regions. And I think we don't need the classic report anymore. So let me remove that, and let's focus on the cards region. And what we now added is a new in the source section, we have the new order by area here, right on the right-hand side. This was formerly a part of the source section. We now pulled it out into a separate section, and we have three options here. None is none. Then we can have a static value, of course, right, which would be, let's say, order by salary ascending, right, and then the cards would be always ordered by salary. But the interesting bit is the item, and that's what we want to talk about. So this is technically, we will have a page item, and the page item is there for the end user to pick some ordering, right? This could be a select list, a radio group, a plugin, whatever, right? So the idea is any page item can be the order by item, and that's the means for the end user to determine the order by, right? To pick something. And now when we have, let's say, a select list where the end user picks between salary ascending, descending, name ascending, name descending, we need to map that to the region source to the query on the end table somehow. And that's what I will configure right now. So what we have is a set of order by clauses, and let me type in a few. So we could say ename ascending. The next is the key. That's the internal key which maps to that order by clause, and a display value ascending. Right, then we could do, of course, ename descending. I don't like that key, so let's use that. And let me use ename this. Also, let me add a bit of salary. And what we could also do is ask cell disk. So we can also bring in a bit of complexity, right? The department, sales. So I now configured my 4 order by clauses, and we have a display value and a key, and we have the name of a page item here. So, and as the page item doesn't exist yet, when I hit OK, Page Designer will create it for me. Right, so Page Designer now created a select list, and based on the keys and the values, remember there was the order by clause, a key, internal key, and the display value, and based on that, Page Designer built the list of values for me. So the page item is a plain select list with a static list of values. It's nothing else, no magic behind that. The only difference is that Apex knows, it's all about metadata in Apex. Apex knows that this select list acts as the order by item, if you will. And whenever we change the value of that select list, Apex will know what happens. Apex will refresh the report region, and Apex will have the report region ordered by our selection. And as Apex knows all this, right, we even don't have to add anything to page items to submit. Apex knows what's going on, right? So we don't need all this. Let me save that. Let's just try it out. So here's our order by item, and now we are ordering by name ascending. That was the default. Let me order by salary ascending, right? So this is the salary, our department and salary. We don't have the department visible on our cards, so you just have to believe me. Or name descending, right? So a very easy way how to configure these various order bys and how to make that available to the end user. As I was saying, and this can't be stressed enough, it's a plain page item, nothing special about this, right? So we can also pick something else. We can have a radio group, right? 4 columns. So I don't want display null and display extra is turned off. That's what I wanted. And then let me pick a nice template option. And I want to have pill buttons and stretch form item, please. And there we are. And this is what we can also have, right? Again, it's a plain page item. If you have a cool plugin which does your very visualization, go ahead and use it. One final thing also, which highlights again, this is a plain page item. And what I'm doing now, don't do this at home, right? It's already turned off. So I have session state protection turned off because I want to do a bit of URL tempering now. How is it called? P2 order by. And as for a normal page item, we can, of course, set the item per URL. You could also use a hidden item here, control it with an onload process. You can do whatever you like, right? So you have full flexibility. And the other thing is, if you have multiple cards region, you can also have one single order by item controlling multiple regions. If you toggle the order by item, all the connected regions will be refreshed and ordered by the selection of the end user. That's pretty much it about the order by item. I think all the rest is on you to try these things out. But I think especially for card regions or classic reports, which are not the standard look and feel. So think about a classic report with the cards template or the comments template or the search interface template, all the report templates which doesn't have column headers. So a classic report which doesn't provide sort. It can be used there as well. It can be used for list views, for lists. Basically, you can use it for all region types which don't have their own means of ordering. So you can't use it for interactive report and interactive grid. Why is that restriction? Because those region types have enough of infrastructure on their own for result sorting, and we don't want these things to interfere. But for all the others, feel free to go ahead and to use it. Okay, so much about the order by item. Let me now get to something completely different, right? This is about REST-enabled SQL. So Apex 22.1 is a release which also has another new feature in the REST area. And actually, it's nothing really new. We are just combining things together. But let me first wrap everything up and set the stage for everybody. I think most of people know what REST-enabled SQL is, right? This was introduced 4 years ago with Apex 18, and it allows us to configure a remote Oracle database, which is front-ended by ORDS. ORDS opens up a special REST endpoint, which accepts SQL queries or clear SQL statements, executes those, and sends results back. And Apex can be the client for such a REST-enabled SQL instance. And this is nothing new. It's there since Apex 18. I have a REST-enabled SQL reference configured. You can see it points to an Oracle 19c database. And also not new, if I go to a page and create a new region on my page. So let's say we want to create a classic report again, then I can pick my REST-enabled SQL reference, pick the remote database. And now when I type in a SQL query, that SQL query is not parsed or executed locally. It's parsed and executed against that remote database. And if you look carefully, you might have seen that when I left this input field, there was a bit of a lag, and that was the network between my local machine here and that remote REST-enabled SQL reference. However, a few things we're always missing for REST-enabled SQL, right? One thing, for instance, is if I want to have another, let's say, a chart on the M table, I have to create my chart region, of course, and I have to type in the query again. And not every SQL query is as easy as this select star from M table. So what if there is a complex query for a remote database? I have to know what to type in. And the database is remote. I might not even have a SQL Plus connection or a SQL Developer connection. So it might be a bit harder to actually know what to type in here. And the other thing is that we cannot combine this. So this query is completely executed remotely. What if I wanted to combine this with local data, right? Well, it does not really work. And also, what if I wanted to download that remote table? So not the M table. The M table is boring, but my super interesting data. And I want to have that data on my local machine. It's possible. You can do some clear SQL code, use the Apex exec package, and offer your code, which downloads that, but it's a piece of work. And when I look at all these requirements, combining with local data, downloading to the local database, and maybe even providing a curated sets of queries. So maybe the administrator of the remote database wants to provide a list of SQL queries, which we as the Apex developers here are supposed to use. When I think about all these requirements, I can't help myself. I have to think about REST data sources, which is a different thing. It's beneath REST-enabled SQL, but it's something else. It's our feature to talk to any arbitrary REST API on the planet. But it has all these features. So the thought was, what if we just combine the two? Right? What if we could create a REST data source based on a SQL query to be executed over REST-enabled SQL. And let me try that out. So we can create a new REST data source from scratch. And this is new. This is the new feature, the new REST source type, REST-enabled SQL query. So, and now the screen changes a bit. I only have to provide a name. And I can pick my REST-enabled SQL reference now. Next step, oh, the query, of course. The credentials are pre-selected. I can just accept those. And then I'm doing my discovery again. And this is like a normal REST-enabled REST data source. We see the data preview. We see rows and columns now derived from the results of that SQL query, and then can create that REST data source. And now we have a REST data source which points to remote data, but which is tailored towards the M table, towards that very SQL query. And when we are now about to use that, so let me create my classic report again. All right, let me take it out and let me create it anew. So classic report, and now I'm picking my REST data source, remote emp, and without having to type a SQL query, I get my columns, I can run it, and here is my data. And now all the features of REST data sources are coming to our fingertips. I can do a local post-processing. So I want to join the remote M table through my local app table, right? That validates. Let me run this again. And there we are. So you just have to believe me. These columns come from the local database and those come from the remote database. For the app table, they are available everywhere and I can join them easily. So I decided for that as the demo scenario. But I think you get the picture, right? We can now easily combine remote data and local data just with the post-processing feature. Next thing, I want to have that data on my local database. Oh, no problem. We have synchronization for REST data sources since 20.2. So, and this is now a REST data source. So we can just do what we always did. The remote and data. So let me save that. And I create my table and I wouldn't configure a schedule now. There have been office hours about synchronizations and there are presentations about synchronizations. So I just hit save and run. And after a while, we will see our synchronization. By the way, due to popular demand, this now refreshes automatically. You don't have to manually refresh the page anymore. And what we now have is the data. So any SQL query to any remote Oracle database over REST was now downloaded to my local database. And finally, there is still that question about, but I don't know what the SQL query is. It's a database, which I don't know about the remote database. I know, oh, it's some healthcare data, but I don't know the data model. I know nothing. But I have to, what can I use in that database? And for REST data sources, we have catalogs, right? We have REST source catalogs since 21.2. And I uploaded a catalog which contains 4 REST data sources, all of that REST-enabled SQL type, right? With pre-configured SQL queries and a description. And as the last demo, let me quickly show you how to use those, right? So let me again go to REST data sources. And now we are creating from a catalog. And actually, I don't want to think, the products table, the end table, we already have that. We don't need that again. So the web credential, these are not part of the catalog, of course. And now I have my REST data source is created. You see no discovery. I was just going ahead. And I think this one is an interesting one, a similarity search on the people table, I think, and contains a bit of Oracle text. Oh, I'm a text fan, I have to try that out, right? So the SQL query is already configured. So let's try to build our page based on that, all right? And keep in mind, we are always working with a remote database. So I want to have a classic report again on my REST data source. And I'm using the similarity search, and that has a parameter. Oh, so we need to have an input field search, and I have to speed up a bit. Let me create that search item. Right, there we are, to type in a search. So here we can map that item. So we are mapping our item to the parameter, which is nice. So let me here results. And finally, we only want to see the classic report if we actually typed in something into the search input field. So let me use a server-side condition here. And I think that should be it, right? So this table contains a row, let's say, for Gustav Eiffel. And here we are. And the nice thing about Oracle Text and Similarity Search is that we can actually use Similarity Search. So in Oracle Text, the operator to use fuzzy search is the question mark. And now if I don't know how Gustav Eiffel is spelled, I can try it with just one F. And there we are, right? I can try something like Einstein, and that also works, right? So that is basically Oracle Text functionality, but I didn't even have to bother about this. All I needed to know is, oh, there is a REST data source, it has a parameter, and this is how to use it. And this is all made available to me using that new REST data source type and the catalog. So it's actually that new feature. We are bringing a lot of functionality together. And that's actually all I have. And I'm passing it on to Shakib again there.
All right. Thanks so much, Carsten. Lots of activity in the chat as well as in the Q&A. So now I'd like to pass it on to Daniel, and he's going to talk about easy application installs from the app gallery in Apex. All right. Take it away, Daniel.
Thanks, Shakib. Just let me share my screen. And I guess I'm the only one preparing slides. So here we are talking about the new application gallery in Apex 22.1. And let me start with some background and what was the motivation behind it to actually create a new application gallery. Then I will show you the new app gallery and how it looks like, how does it work, and what features does it have. Next would be the architecture behind it. So how does it work? And that architecture is basically also important if you would like to host your own apps. So I think that should make that clearer. So let's start with our motivation. As maybe some of you know, we already had an app gallery which contained our sample and starter apps before 20.2 release. But this had some downsides, mainly for us. So you have a larger core size. So you have to ship all that applications with the main zip bundle of Apex. And if we found a bug or enhanced some sample application, we needed an official patch set like a PSE to patch that applications. So since starting with 21.1, we didn't include sample and starter apps anymore. Instead, they are now hosted completely on GitHub. This has some pros. We now have a smaller core size, and patching is basically just a commit in a Git version system. And the next pro would be that you can follow the changes easily because you see the version history on GitHub. But a big con would be the UX of installing apps actually isn't that great. If you have a look at the current Apex release, which is out there, you have to go to the gallery, you have to click on a card. These will link you to our GitHub page. From there, you have to download the zip file, and then you have to import that zip file into your Apex workspace. That's a lot of work for just want to dig into a sample application, how we build things. And yeah, of course, you will not get any update notifications. So if we further developed one particular sample app, you would not know about that. So next, these are the important links for the old gallery. So the old gallery used our GitHub static site and of course the GitHub repository. So github.com/oryx/apex was used before. Coming to the new gallery, now it's possible to install the starter and sample apps without leaving Apex. We have a new user-friendly design, so a card-like design for the ones who already saw it on apex.oracle.com. The apps are still hosted on GitHub, so this pro for us is still there. You will see an update badge if an update of an app is available, and you can delete and run apps directly from the gallery. And if you install an application, you have basically two advanced installation settings. So instead of auto-generating an application ID for you, you can choose a fixed application ID. And if your workspace, for example, has assigned multiple database schemas, you can choose the parsing schema for the supporting database objects installation. Coming to supporting database objects, these are basically database objects like tables, views, packages, procedures, and stuff like that. And of course, we have now the possibility that you, as our customers, can integrate their own apps there. But nothing's better than showing it live. So I now show you an old Apex installation or the current Apex release. So this is an 21.2 release. And if we go there to our gallery, as I mentioned earlier, you will just see that screen. And if you click on one of that cards, you will be linked to our GitHub.io static site. From there, you can download the apps and choose the Apex version. So always download the correct app for your Apex release. The second possibility would be to directly go to our GitHub repository. And as the select list before, we have to choose a version specific branch. So for example, 21.2. And there you will see our sample and start apps. Coming to sample apps, these are basically examples of Apex features, and starter apps would be apps ready for production. So you just install these apps and can use it inside your company, for example. And yeah, you have to download them, going back to your builder, going to application builder, and then go through the whole process of importing an application, for example. So let's switch to a current release or a future release of Apex. So this would be 22.1. And if you now go to the app gallery, you will see this screen. So all apps from our GitHub repository are listed here in 3 categories. So you have our sample applications, you have our start apps, which are ready to install and use. And you have a section for custom apps with a link to the actual documentation. So these would be the possibility to include your own apps here. But coming back to the sample apps, as you already see, we have now an update notification. So I already installed the sample approval apps some days ago, and it seems that an update is available, and I see it here. So I am notified. And basically, you will see the app name, which was the author, and some app description. And you can also search here, for example, grid. And this is mentioned in these texts. But installing an application would be just clicking the install button. Then you get this pop-up. And as mentioned before, you have two advanced settings, so artisan and application ID and the parsing schema. I just let it per default and click install application. And there we go. The app is installed, and we link directly to that installed application. And from there, you just click Run Applications, and you're good to go. If you're on the gallery screen, you also see here a Run Application button. So you can also click this one to run the application. And if you want to uninstall the sample application, you can click that trash can button. And this will uninstall the complete application definition and also all supporting database objects like tables, views, and stuff like that. Okay, next up would be the architecture behind it. So I mentioned the last point first. All web service requests in this kind GitHub are done on the client browser. So you don't need any database settings like ACLs or Oracle SSL wallet in place. It just works out of the box. But you must make sure that these endpoints are available. So Apex, Oracle.com, and raw GitHub user content.com should be reachable from the browser. But I think that is the default in most environments. And for some background, the gallery first fetches some a file called manifest.json, which I show you in a minute. This is also hosted in our GitHub repository. And this JSON file is basically a description of all apps which are housed in our GitHub repository. So this information is then used to draw the gallery cards. If you click the install button, we also do a web service request to GitHub again and fetch the application zip export. This zip export is then uploaded to the DB, and from there, the normal installation process is gone. Just having a look at that JSON. So this JSON has three main arrays. And these three main arrays correspond to the three tabs in the UI you just saw. So you have an array for sample apps, starter apps, and for custom apps. Each array consists sub-objects which define one particular application. So these here, so name, description, author, the app version, the app icon, URL, source, zip is used to render the cards. As you see, this would be the name, this would be the author, this would be the app description, the icon. And if you click the install button, the zip property would be used to download that zip file. If you want to include your sample application in a multi-language environment, so the application builder has nine languages, or is available in 9 languages. You could also do that. So instead of using name and description on this level, as you see here, you could use an I18N sub-object in there per application with the language code, for example, EN for English, DE for Germany. And these then have the name and description attributes, if you like. So that's optional, actually. But just have a look at this. So going back to the application gallery, I open up the network panel. search for GitHub and reload the page. So we see in action what the client fetches from our endpoint. So we see there's a manifest JSON fetched from GitHub. This is used to draw the cards. We also see that the SVG icons for our apps are hosted on GitHub. And now click the install button. We now see that a particular zip file is also loaded from GitHub. And then we are ready to install the application. So this would be the base architecture behind it. So next up would be how to include your custom applications. Yeah, I think there are two reasons to include custom apps. The first, more important reason would be you actually have your own custom apps. And the second would be if for some kind of reason your network is not allowed or your browser is not allowed in a particular network to connect to these two endpoints, then you could basically go to our GitHub repository, download the zip file of the whole repository and host that internally. But what's basically required? So as you already saw, you need that manifest JSON, and this must be served over the HTTP protocol, so some web server, for example. You also have to host the app icons and app export files in zip format over an HTTP connection. And you must make sure that your all GET calls to your web server include the access control allow origin response header. Otherwise, a browser is not allowed to connect to that particular endpoint. So this would be the infrastructure part, and the next would be just an instance parameter called gallery file URLs, where you add your link to your JSON file. So in the UI, that would look like this. But going back to GitHub, I have my own repository with Apex samples I created for the last Apex release. And I also included a manifest JSON file for two apps. So that would be the Apex State demo app, and that's a GeoSample app showcasing the newer geocoding features. So let me just pick that raw URL, going back to my builder. And now we have to go to the internal administration of Apex. So just go to this app ID 4050, logging in as an instance administrator, going to manage instance settings, and there we have a new category application gallery. Just let me scroll down, which is pre-populated with the default link we use for our sample applications, but you can add your own links here. So, but just going into a new line, adding an additional manifest JSON or call to an JSON endpoint and apply changes. You could also do that in production environments with the PL/SQL API using Apex Instance Admin API. So that should be it on the instance. And now every workspace would on this instance would contain also these apps. So let's go back to my personal workspace, looking at the apps, and there should be two new apps with author my name. So I can also search for that apps. And that's basically it to include your own apps. And the installation process of them is pretty much the same. You click the install button, the zip file is fetched, and you can install the application then. I think that's it from my side. I hope this makes installing sample apps much more easier than before. And back to you, Shakib.
All right. Thanks so much, Daniel. And you're right. This is the easiest way to install sample applications and starter applications. I have a couple of questions for you, Daniel, if that's okay.
Sure.
One was, is there a chance of something like this, like plugins, like sample apps for plugins in the future? Any thoughts you want to share on that?
We are basically looking into such topics if we can expand such functionality in a future Apex release. So looking at REST data catalogs, which Carsten showed, which could be shareable between environments, also for plugins. We are definitely looking at that topic.
Sounds good. All right. And there's one more question here. This is why the sample database application was removed a few versions ago and not replaced or updated with a new version. And I can take this one on as well. The sample database app that we had before, that was trying to do too many things. It was trying to show like the individual features of Apex, but also have a use case around it. And it didn't really quite make sense to have a single app that tried to encompass everything together. So that's why we really have these starter applications and sample applications to show you the different features and functionality. So there's really no need to have the sample database app because all of them are sample database applications, right? And they feature different capabilities of Apex. All right. And there's one more question here. Would it be advisable if we have a template or master application on which new applications are based, or have it as a custom app in the app gallery? Any thoughts on this one?
That could be one reason to host your own custom app. Your own custom app could be a template application which has already the UI of your company installed, so theme adjustments or plugins which you use in every app, and now you can share that to every workspace in your instance. Yeah, of course.
That's good. There's also a comment here from Sven saying he'd like to see a blog post on how to set up an internal app gallery. So maybe an idea for later for you.
Of course, but our new documentation is pretty good. So also the documentation mentions that steps.
That's right. All right, we're almost at the top of the hour. I just want to quickly recap a few updates really quickly. So of course, if you missed anything at all, like maybe you joined the last few minutes, no problems. Just go to apexoracle.com/office hours and you'll be able to watch all of the replays. The recording of today will be posted probably the next day or two, and you'll be able to watch it there as well. I did want to mention again, this is a 5-part series. So on May 5th, so next week, we'll have, we'll feature developer experience improvements. And on May 12th, we'll talk about the persistent authentication, PWA and UX enhancements and Apex. If you're a native Spanish speaker, I encourage you to check out the Apex Office Hours in Espanol, which is going to start in an hour from now. And this will have Monica, Carlos, and Alexis from the Apex team, talking about the new features in Spanish. Other than that, I'd like to thank you all for attending this Office Hours session, and I wish you all a good day. Thanks.